Chodesh Tov and Geder Shabbat. Thank you to Lisa and Leon Myers, who is sponsoring this week's Dvar Torah in memory of Lisa's mother, Eleanor Schechter, Zochrona Livracha. Eleanor was a very edel woman who was always gracious and kind. She is remembered very fondly by so many in our Beth Jacob community, and she worked side by side with Saul and helped him with his work on behalf of the shul. May her memory always be for a blessing. The 2022 Winter Olympics are around a year away. Let me share the fictional tale of the religious yeshiva student who was a star slalom skier. With tzitzis streaming out from behind, he'd beaten the world record several times. He made the U.S. Olympic team, made sure that none of the races were on Shabbat, and was the favorite for an Olympic gold medal in the slalom race. In the slalom race, as you know, the skier has to zigzag and pass through about 20 to 25 gates in the fastest time. Came the day of the final. The crowd waited in anticipation. The French skier sped down the course in 1 minute 38.3 seconds. The Swiss in 1 minute 38.7 seconds. The Italian in 1 minute 36 seconds. Then came the turn of the yeshiva bacher from Lakewood, New Jersey, representing the U.S. The crowd waited and waited and waited. And finally, after a full 5 minutes, he comes down and crosses the finish line. And the coach screams at him and says, "Ruvain, what happened to you?" And the yeshiva student, dripping sweat, exhausted, replies, "All right, who's the wise guy who put a mezuzah on every pole?" And the lesson of the story is perhaps that it's not only important to be at the finish line in the fastest time, but also how you get there is significant. Even though you don't have to kiss all the mezuzot, but you do have to zigzag correctly through the gates, or otherwise you're disqualified. The portion of Shemot, which we read last week, elaborates on the Shibud, on the intense persecution of the Jewish people in Egypt. The portion of Bo, which we read next week, is the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the dramatic redemption, freedom from Egypt. Parshat Vaeyra this week is when the 10 plagues begin, and so it's a transition from Shemot to Bo. Vaeyra is the phase between the start and the finish line, so to speak. It's the phase between slavery and complete redemption. And I think that today we're living in the era of Parshat Vaeyra, of the time of transition in multiple respects. We're not in slavery. There's no avodat perach or backbreaking, outright persecution of Jews. But we have plenty of challenges, and we're not yet at the full stage of redemption. We celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut for the incredible, miraculous national achievements of our generation, but we still mourn on Tisha B'Av because there's so much that we're still longing for. And thinking about the pandemic, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine distribution beginning, but we're far from being out of the woods, and the numbers are still alarmingly high. If we think about transitions and managing transitions, we could apply this to our government politically, since we're at a time of transition of power from one president to another. And whatever one's political views are, we're in a difficult place as a country right now. And we're praying for peace and stability in our government and to find that path of healing as a country and as a community. And so whether it's our government or COVID or the state of Israel or our personal lives, how do we manage this transitional phase, which is reflected, symbolized by Vaeyra? What is supposed to be our reaction to this reality? And the verses back in Shemot record that when the people initially heard the news from Moshe about the upcoming redemption, they were all excited. They believed, they listened, they were dancing and bowing. And yet now at the beginning of Parshat Vaeyra, Hashem declares to Moshe the famous 4 expressions of redemption. V'hotzeiti, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. I will take you out of the suffering, I will save you from the work, I will redeem you, and I will take you as a nation. And we memorialize these 4 expressions when we drink 4 cups at the Pesach Seder. However, this time when Moshe conveys the news, Lo Shamuel Moshe, Mi kotzer ruach u'mevadah kasha, they have trouble believing it. They don't want to listen, and there's no dancing or bowing. Why the different reaction? After hearing the 4 expressions of Geula, suddenly they can't believe. Rav Natali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv, explains that the 4 words of redemption are not merely 4 expressions, but more accurately, the 4 stages of redemption. V'hotzeiti is taking them out of the backbreaking labor. V'hitzalti is stopping the work altogether. V'ga'alti, that's freeing them from Egypt. And v'lakachti, that's taking them as a nation, which really happens weeks later at Har Sinai. And understood in this way, we can suggest what was bothering the Jewish people and why they had trouble listening. And my teacher, Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter, explains that with these expressions or phases, Moshe was implying how redemption happens, and it was this message that frustrated the Jews. Bnei Israel realized for the first time that redemption is not instantaneous, and it won't necessarily go smoothly. Originally, the people had thought that when they signed on with God, they would never be disappointed again. God is with us. We're all set up. We love protexia, and what better protexia than this? But then after Paro makes the work harder by making them collect their own straw. And when they hear these 4 stages, that it's going to be phases and it's going to take time, the realization sets in that, gosh, that this is going to take a while. And there will be setbacks, which will make it a challenging process. And they didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to listen. But Moshe was teaching Bnei Israel and all of us that redemption is never quick. It's never easy or linear in an upward direction straight, even with God's providence. And this was difficult for them to accept, as it is difficult for all of us. We all know how this pandemic is dragging on and it feels like forever. And we're itching to get back to things, but it's taking time, much more time than we expected. With Israel, we describe the modern state as Reshit Tzmichat Gulateinu. It's the beginning of the blossoming of our redemption. It's not the complete redemption yet. It's not even the Tzmichat, it's not the blossoming, but it's the Reshit Tzmichat. It's the beginning of the blossoming. And Rav Kook asked why the pasuk in the last chapter of Zechariah describes Mashiach as Ani Rochev ala Chamor, as a poor person riding on a mule or a donkey. Why not describe him as riding on a horse? Or why not riding in a Porsche or a Maserati? And the answer is, Rav Kook said, because if you've ever ridden on a donkey, you know that the ride is somewhat bumpy. And the donkey goes ahead a few feet and then goes backward. So too the process of redemption is shaky and bumpy. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. It's Milchemet HaShechrur in 48, the 6-day war victory in 67, but then it's the Intifadas. It's BDS in Iran taking us back, but then the alliances with the Gulf countries and the continued growth of the country. And if we think not just about the pandemic and about the state of Israel, but personally, we want to be there already in our careers. We want to make it and get there in our relationships and personal growth. We want it to go perfectly. And my hope is that for some of you, it has gone perfectly or close to it. But for most of us, it's bumpy. It takes us through many zigzags and some mistakes and failures along the way. Everybody wants redemption and success instantly and easily. But God says back, you want achievement without ever tasting failure? You don't want to work for it? You want all the games to be fixed? And the lesson of the Parsha Vaeyra and of the 4 expressions or phases of redemption is this, that redemption is not instantaneous, but it's a process. And to reach achievement, there usually needs to be failure, which means also that there's a value, inherent value to failure. And understanding that helps us have patience, faith, and determination to keep our chins up, even if things are not going exactly as planned. The journey, after all, is a major part of the reward, even if we're not able to immediately achieve the outcome, if at all. And this is what Professor Carol Dweck of Stanford writes in her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, that in the fixed mindset, everything is about the outcome. But in the growth mindset, you have to value what you're doing regardless of the outcome, where you're tackling problems, charting new courses, working on important issues, and maybe they haven't found the cure to cancer, but she describes how the search itself is something that's meaningful. And so indeed, it's not easy, and it's not instantaneous, but it's a process, but the process itself has significance, and that's a time of growth. And it's not all about the finish line, but it's how one strives to move towards it, which is also important. And so let us remember this. I think this challenging notion ultimately is comforting. This is the way of redemption and success all throughout history. It's the 4 gradual stages of redemption and phases, but also for all of us in this transitional period of Vaeyra. And this is the process of growth. But if we have patience and we have faith and confidence, then like Bnei Israel ultimately celebrated their success, so too we should merit the achievement of our goals. And if it takes some time to hang in there and to grow through the journey.